You've probably seen videos of building demolitions before, where an entire high-rise building crumbles down in a cloud of smoke and debris and building parts. In this tutorial, I'm going to create a demolition using Blender physics and this model of a building that I designed. I'm using Blender 3.5 because I'm still trying to get Blender 4.4 to work for me. One of the issues I'm having trouble with in Blender 4.4 is installing the screencast keys. This guy right here. It just doesn't seem to work for me. Even after I enable the screencast keys checkbox, this checkbox right here, it still doesn't work for Blender 4.4. So instead I'm using Blender 3.5. So without further ado, let us proceed. So the building is really simple. It's a 6-story building. I've placed each of the floors into collections, which you can see in the outliner right here. So this is ground floor. If I hide it, the ground floor will disappear. These are the roof panels. You've got floor 6, floor 5, floor 4, 3, 2, and 1. So if you want to hide and unhide the floors, just toggle their icons in the outliner. The ground floor of the building, which is this part right here, the bottommost part is really simple. Made of cubes. I just reshaped cubes and used the Bldg modifier to cut out parts of it to make it sort of like a rough porte cochere. And then the pillars are just basically cylinders. The floors themselves, what you would call the floors in the superstructure, I guess the ground floor is part of the superstructure, but the first floor up, the floors are made up of panels which I duplicated as many times as was necessary to create the building. Each floor is made up of 24 panels, and there are 144 panels in all. Let me just pull out one of the panels so you can see what it looks like. So this is basically an individual panel. Like that. Let's turn it around a little bit. Let me rotate the panel so you can see what it looks like. So this is basically it. The reason for the triangular shape on the bottom is to facilitate the fall into the building. Because in a building demolition, the parts fall inside. They fall towards the center of the building. They don't fall outside. So that's why I imparted this triangular shape to the bottom. As for the panel itself, I got a material from Blender Kit. And if you click on the panel and go to the materials icon, it will tell you the name of the material that I chose. It's called Muddy Cracked Ground. To create the glass, I duplicated the panel, scaled it, extruded it a little bit to make it bulge. I gave it the glass BSDF material. And then after that, I joined both parts using Ctrl-J. This is not a building modeling tutorial, so I didn't think it was necessary to go into details of creating the panel. But if you want to, if you would like to see how I created the panel, you can leave a comment, and I'll show you how I created the panel. It's really not complicated at all. So that's the individual panel. Let's put it back in the building. Okay. So let me hide all but one of the floors of the building now so you can see how the building was created. So just looking at the ground floor, you can see that the panels are stacked side by side in a square shape. And to create the other floors, I merely duplicated the ground floor and stacked the floors right on top of each other. So let's make them visible again. The roof panels is simply a cube I flattened, and then I used the Bldg modifier to cut it into 4 parts. And then after that, I went into edit mode and I separated the cube into 4 parts. Leave me a comment if you want to know how to do it, and I'll make a video specially for it. In fact, anything that you would need clarification on in this tutorial, you can all leave comments. I'll aggregate all the comments and then I'll make a video explaining each part clearer. I just don't want to go into too much into detail about building modeling because I want to concentrate more on the physics part and the smoke and the explosion part. And now onto the Blender physics part. All of the parts that make up the building, except for the ground floor, are given physics properties. So except for this part right here, let me hide it so you will see which part I'm talking about. So except for that part right there, all other parts of the building are given physics properties. I didn't give the ground floor any physics properties because I figured there was no need. Only the upper part of the building would collapse. And that would make for a greater spectacle anyway. There was no need to really bother with the ground floor of the building. So let me make it visible again. So let me click on one of the building panels and we'll inspect its physics properties. Just click on any random one. So going to the physics tab, this one right here, you can see that it's giving a rigid body property. We know it has a rigid body property because of the X. If I click on it again, I toggle it, the rigid body property will be gone. This particular panel will no longer have a rigid body property. So if I were to play the animation right now, every part of the superstructure except for that panel that I had removed the physics properties from will collapse because it no longer has any Blender physics property associated with it. So let me stop the animation. Let me restore its Blender physics properties. Just click rigid body again. And these are default properties. For this tutorial, the default properties will suffice. Now there is one exception, which is the roof of the ground floor. This part right here. For this part, its type property is set to passive. When you set an object's type property to passive when working with Blender physics, it remains stationary when you play the animation. It does not move. For objects whose type property are set to active, as is the case with the parts, they are all set to active. When the animation is played, the parts that are set to active will fall under the force of gravity, which is exactly what we want. We want the parts to fall when the building collapses in reaction to the force of the explosion. And the reason we set the type option of the roof of the ground floor to passive is because we want the falling panels to come to rest on top of it. If we didn't do this, if we set the type option of the roof of the ground floor to active, like the rest of the panels, the roof of the ground floor will fall with the rest of the panels when the animation is played. And this is not what we want. We just want only the panels that make up the sides of the building as well as the roof to fall. We don't want any changes to the ground floor. There is one final detail that is very important to our building demolition simulation. It's a bit like cheating actually, but it's another little object that I added to the building to ensure that the panels are confined within a specific area. Because when you see a building demolitions, when you see videos of building demolitions, the panels don't fly hither and thither. You know, they sort of collapse into the building. So I decided to add this part to the simulation to, if not confine the falling parts to the central area of the building completely, well, to concentrate as many of them as possible in the central area of the building. This part I call the confiner because, well, I guess it confines the parts to the central area of the building. That's the part right here in the outliner. So let me make it visible. Now you are thinking, well, you say it's visible, but I don't see anything. That's true. That's because even though I added the part to the simulation, I also made it invisible. Because if I didn't make it invisible, you wouldn't be able to see the parts of the building falling because it completely encloses the building. That's why I referred to it earlier as something akin to cheating. Because sure, the way the engineers do it in real life, they know how to place the explosives in such a way that the demolition sends the parts of the building towards its center. They don't use any confining outer wall. But this is just a simulation / animation. So I figured what it looks like is what really counts. And in movie production and animation, all kinds of tricks are employed. So now let me reveal the confiner partially so you will see how it relates to our simulation. With the confiner selected, I'll click on the Materials tab, this icon right here, and that will bring up the FAC, this field right here, FAC. When it's 0, the object that it relates to is completely transparent. So I'm going to increase its value here to make it partially visible. And you can see that there is a box surrounding the building. Now, if you want to know how I made this partially visible, I'll click on the shading tab. And this is how you make an object partially visible in Blender. I actually have a tutorial on how you can make objects visible and invisible in Blender. I have a link to it below. So let me go back to layout. Now, if I move it around, increase its FAC again so we can see more of it. You can see how it surrounds the superstructure of the building. You see, the building is entirely enclosed by it. So what I did was I took a cube, duplicated the cube, scaled it down, and extruded the inner cube from the outer cube to make this tube. And then make sure the tube was tall enough to enclose the entire building. Then at the bottom of the cube, I took cubes, 4 little cubes, shaped them to fit. Let me move it all the way around. Place them at the bottom, and then using Ctrl J, I joined all the pieces together. I joined all the cubes I had shaped, and the outer wall, the outer tube that forms the confiner, I joined all of them together. If you want to see how I did that, I could also make a little supplemental video to show you. What that did was it enclosed all of the upper part of the building, the superstructure, inside this tube, the confiner. So if you can, as you can see from here, if you look, let me make it closer. You can see that the entire building is encased within the tube. I made sure that these other 4 cubes at the bottom, this one right here, you can just see its shadow, penetrates the ground floor. That way the upper part is completely sealed off from the ground below. When the panels fall, they will be collected by this outliner, because this forms a sort of airtight seal around the superstructure of the building. Let me play the animation. When the panels fall, you can see that they all fall within the confiner. They all fall within the confiner. Of course, to make all this possible, Blender physics properties have to be given to the confiner. So the confiner itself has physics properties. So if you go to the physics tab, I gave you the Blender physics property, but with one very important difference. In the shape field here, it is set to mesh. You see, with all the other parts, like say the rooftop for instance, the shape field is set to convex hull. That suffices for the rooftop, but that won't do when it comes to the confiner. I found that from experimentation, because if you don't change it to mesh, when you play the animation, the parts basically explode out of the building. I'll show you what I mean. So change it to convex hull, like with all the other parts, and play the animation, and the parts just explode. Well, this is not a building explosion animation, it's a building demolition, and parts don't just fly out of a building when it's demolished. So let's go back and change it to mesh. Play it again, go back to the beginning, reset our animation. Play it again. The parts fall like normal. It's what makes the difference right here. Make sure this is set to mesh, not convex hull. It makes sense when you understand a little bit about Blender physics. See, when something is set to mesh, from my understanding of Blender physics, it means that it actually behaves as you would expect it to behave in real life. It more closely resembles the kind of behavior that you would expect in real life. In real life, this is what we would expect if a building under demolition was surrounded by an impenetrable outer wall. We would expect it to deflect the falling parts, back towards the center of the building. Whereas if an object is given the convex hull option in the shape field, it is basically created as a solid object. Nothing will fall into it. So when we change this confiner to convex hull, even though it is clearly hollow, it essentially behaves like a solid object. I hope I managed to make that clear. Let me show you a quick demonstration of what I mean. So here are two objects here. This one is clearly a tube. I've cut a piece of it out to make a tube. And this is an object resting above it. Now you can see that the object is positioned above the tube and is clearly offset from its center of gravity. The center of gravity of this object right here, this object on top, the upper object, will be somewhere around here, somewhere around the middle. Now if we were to place the center of gravity of this object above this tube, and it fell from a low height, not a great height, just a low height, we might expect it to rest on this tube and not falling because the center of gravity is positioned above it. Like if we were to place the object like right about here. But if we were to move the object to this position, we would expect it to fall into the tube. So let's see what happens. Let's give both objects physics properties. Start with the tube. Physics. We want rigid body. And leave it at convex hull. Don't change this option. Now let's go to the object above it. Rigid body. Let's change this one to mesh. We want this one to behave the way we would expect it to behave in real life. So let's change it to mesh. And of course, let's make the bottom one passive so it does not move. So change this to passive. So when we play the animation now, you see that the upper object just falls and rests on top of the tube. It doesn't fall into the tube as we would expect it to. This is because since the bottom object has the convex hull option set here, it is basically acting as a solid object. As far as this upper object is concerned, it is falling onto a solid object. Now, if we were to change this bottom object to mesh, see what happens. It falls into the tube. Let me reduce the length of this animation. Let's just make it 50. It falls into the tube. Let me move the object up higher. That's what we want. Okay. We can increase the animation a little bit. I'll make it 90. And play it. It falls into the tube. Because now the bottom option set to mesh. So it is actually now behaving like we would expect it to behave in real life. Because in real life, we would expect an object that has the shape of this upper object, this one right there, falling on the lower object to go inside. There's no reason why it shouldn't go inside. It's small enough to fit within the confines of the tube. So it falls into the tube. But if we change the shape option now of the tube to convex hull, you will see the object again just fall and rest on top of it, because now the tube is behaving like a solid object again. So I hope you now see the difference between the convex hull option and the mesh option when dealing with Blender physics. Of course, there are other options in the shape field. I've never worked with them. I've only worked with the mesh and convex hull options. So you can play around with them and see what results you get with them. So let's continue with our tutorial. Now, as we all know, when a building is demolished, a great deal of dust is created. Blender has a great tool that we can use to simulate this dust. We will use the physics smoke function. Let me hide the roof panels so that we can see inside the building. Now let's change the view a bit. Add a cube. This cube will be our emitter object for the smoke. Now let's move it to the central area of the building. Shift Z. There we go. We want the smoke to completely enshroud the building. So let's scale the smoke to completely encompass the building. S for scale, Shift Z, until it just completely surrounds the building. In Blender, to scale on only two axes, just press scale, then Shift plus the axis you don't want to be affected by the scaling. So I pressed scale Shift Z because I wanted to scale on only the X and the Y axis. So the Z axis wasn't affected. You can find this particular shortcut in my Blender shortcuts video. I've also linked to that below. Now let's move the emitter object. Move it to about level with the roof of the ground floor. Yeah, something like that. Let's make it a little smaller. Okay. Now let's switch to edit mode. Make sure faces are selected. Click the top face of the emitter cube and scale it out a little bit. We do this because hopefully the smoke will spread outwards. It wouldn't just go directly vertical. We want it to spread outward a little bit. Back to object mode. Now let's give it physics properties. Click on the physics icon. This time we select fluid. For type, we select flow. Flow type, leave it as smoke. For geometry, we select inflow. The smoke color is a little too dark for my taste, so I will lighten it a little bit. Density, we'll set it at its maximum value. Click the initial velocity box. For normal, I enter 6 in this field. And for the Z field, I enter 6 as well. That will do it for our emitter object. Let's display the roof panels again. And now we'll add the domain object. The smoke will be generated inside the domain object. So add a cube. Switch to outline view. Scale the cube until it encompasses the building. Now let's see how tall it looks. We want it to be taller than the building. We don't want to see building parts collapsing that are apparently not being affected by any smoke. So let's move it up a little bit. Okay, put it right there. Let's change to viewport shading. Okay, so move it a little bit lower, like so, right there. Let's see how high it is from the top of the building. Switch to outline. Okay, back to viewport shading. Let's go to edit mode. Select the top face. Just move it up and down, see how far it is from the top of the building. Okay, so it completely covers the building. So let's just, a little bit like that. This other object that looks much taller than the building is the confiner. You know, the object we added to keep the panels concentrated towards the center of the building while they were falling. So don't let it confuse you. Let's also scale the domain a little bit at the top to spread the smoke out. So S. So now we're ready to give the domain object physics properties. Back to object mode. With the domain object selected, click on fluid. Type domain this time. We want it at gas. And pretty much just leave all these default settings. Let's change the frame end. I think the action stops at about frame 160 or so. So let's take it to like frame 160. And if we play our animation now, we will see our smoke. So you see the building collapsing and you see the smoke. Let's switch to viewport shading. Let's hide our emitter object because it's a bit distracting. So let's go to cube, play the animation again, but lo and behold, the panels collapse, but there is no smoke. How can we make the smoke visible? For that, we need to go to shading mode and make some changes to the domain object. So with the domain object selected, click on the shading tab, click on new. It will give you the principled BSDF shader. This is not the one we want. Make sure your mouse is hovering over this window and press Ctrl plus spacebar to maximize it. Click on the principled BSDF shader, press delete to delete it. Click on add shader. We want the principled volume shader. This guy right here. Add it. Now connect the volume to the volume input of material output. Not the surface input now, but the volume input. Let's scroll to make it bigger. Go to black body intensity and drag all the way, or just simply enter 1. Press Ctrl plus spacebar again, and then click on layout. So make sure you are in viewport shading. Now play the animation again. And this time you will see the smoke. It's much darker than I would like. That is why I rendered the animation, because the rendered version looks much better. And also, in the animation, the domain box is not visible. Because if you hide the domain box, then no smoke is produced at all. It won't produce any smoke at all. You want to see smoke. So I rendered the animation, because when you render it, not only is the smoke visible, but the domain box is also hidden. I also changed the gravity setting to make the panels fall more slowly. This gravity setting produces a more realistic demolition effect. With the default gravity setting, the panels were falling too quickly. I added 2 more lights to the default light you get when you open a new Blender file. And I also moved the camera to a different location, a location that will show the building to its best effect. That's it. Render and then render animation, and then you get your video. First, make sure you make the proper settings by clicking on Output Properties. This icon that looks like a printer. And that's it. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and entertaining. Please leave comments below. And if there are any parts of this video that you don't understand clearly, please let me know in the comments. Like I said, if there are any specific areas of the video that you need more clarification on, I will be more than willing to make a supplementary video explaining it. And if you found this video helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to support this channel, there are links provided below in the video description. I would like to introduce you to my apps. The first one is called Number Identifier, which you can find at whatnumberisthis.com. This app was created for people who have trouble working with large numbers. People generally have trouble with numbers larger than 9 figures or so. If you want to decode a number in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions or larger, this app was created for you. Just enter the number in the input box, hit enter or click on submit, and the app will display the same number in words. You can enter any number, very large numbers, not so large numbers, any number at all. You can enter single digit numbers, 2-digit numbers, any number at all. It doesn't matter. I created this app myself using JavaScript. No online AI resources, no pre-built routines obtained from other websites. Even when you make a mistake in separating your digits with commas, as with the number on the screen, this app still correctly converts the number into words. Every line of code was written by me, from the first to the last. This app, Number Identifier, is my favorite out of the apps I have written. This is the raw code right here in JavaScript. Everything is written in JavaScript. Next app is a picture puzzle app, which you can find at solvethepicture.com. The app involves trying to guess the identity of a picture by opening squares which conceal the picture. The object of the game is to identify the picture by opening as few squares as possible. The fewer squares you use, the better you are at the game. There is also a box that keeps track of the number of squares you open in trying to identify the picture. It's a fun little game. You will enjoy it. My third app is Tic-Tac-Toe, located at letstick-tac-and-toe.com. It's the classic tic-tac-toe game, and you have two options. You can play solo or you can play against the computer. When you play solo, you click on both the X's and the O's, and you are responsible for forming straight lines with both of them. You will probably find it more fun to play against the computer. When you choose this option, you are playing against the computer. You control the O's and the computer controls the X's. The computer can win or you can win. As you click your O's, the computer will be trying to thwart you at every turn. When you form two O's in a straight line, you will see that the computer tries to prevent you from forming three O's in a straight line and winning the game. But at the same time, you have to be vigilant as to what the computer is doing, because the computer is also trying to form three X's in a row and win the game. If you are not also trying to forestall the computer's attempts at winning, it will beat you. Sometimes the computer wins, sometimes you win. You just have to be alert. It's a fun game. You will enjoy it. I'd also like to introduce my book, The Soccer Performance Evaluation System, which is a book I wrote for evaluating the performance of soccer players scientifically using statistics. This book is available for purchase at Amazon.com. I have included a link to its sales page below. I have also created a website located at spessoccer.com, where I have published the first 4 pages of the book. You can read these first 4 pages to get a general idea of what the book is about. Many people think that the performances of players on the soccer field are not suited to statistical representation. My book debunks this impression. It shows you how you can scientifically and statistically document the performance of soccer players by assigning points to the moves and plays they make on the field. If you read the excerpt provided at spessoccer.com, you will be introduced to many of the concepts covered in the book. After the introduction and essential concepts, it goes into more detail about the areas that the book covers. It shows you how the field is divided into transverse assessment areas as well as longitudinal assessment areas, which divide the field into areas with points associated with them from which the players' performances are graded. A sample evaluation of a play in an actual match is also included in the book. So if you are a soccer coach, soccer administrator, player or fan, and you've always wanted to represent the performance of soccer players statistically or through points earned, this book is for you. Give it a read. I think you'll love it. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.